Welcome to worship with the Universalist Unitarian Church of Peoria. My name is Reverend Jennifer Innis, and it is my pleasure to serve in the ministry along with the members and friends, children and youth of this congregation. Our mission is to embrace freedom, love inclusively, grow in spirit, and help heal the world. It is good to be together for these purposes and all the ways that we can gather. One of the essential elements of our faith and our mission is to speak the truth in love and to speak the truth to power. We do so in part by addressing the concerns of the day. Given the rioting and the efforts to undermine democracy in the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, the plan for this worship has changed. The title, Claiming Imagination, remains the same. The thoughts, words, and music focus on the long and deep struggle for democracy and equity, and to act on a dream of a more abundant future for everyone. As we come together in worship, we are mindful of the many people who have traveled before us. We recognize and honor the Peoria people who lived and created their lives on these lands long before we were here. This congregation is sustained by the care and talent and generous gifts of the members and friends. If you'd like to make a financial donation, you are welcome to see the link in the chat or at the end of the service. And while we meet virtually at this time, we always want to welcome guests. If you are new to our congregation, I invite you to help us get to know you. At the end of the service will be the link for our coffee hour on Zoom, and all are welcome to the conversation. If you'd like to get to know more about our congregation, please leave a note for the office through the website or on Facebook. And I have one special announcement. Beginning on January 21st, we have our adult education program for the next few months will be in partnership with other Unitarian Universalist congregations in central Illinois. We together will be studying the Widening the Circle of Concern report that was generated by the Unitarian Universalist Association. This is a joint effort and opportunity to reflect on systemic oppression, to reflect on how its presence is in our congregations, and how we might shift our culture and ourselves. The program runs on Thursdays from January 21st through April 1st, and the link to register was in the Friday email. I hope you register as soon as possible, and please see me for questions. Now, our music and our hymns comes from a few different sources. I want to say thank you to the Neils for permission to share their 2020 version of America the Beautiful. Thank you also to Community Church of New York, Unitarian Universalist, for their performance of Though I May Speak with Bravest Fire. And finally, thank you to Brother Sun for their performance of How Can I Keep From Singing? They created this at the General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association in Providence, Massachusetts in 2014. And now, I invite us to gather and worship together.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains' majesty above the fruited plains. America, America, God shed her grace on thee, and crown thy good in neighborhoods from sea to shining sea.
Oh, beautiful, for reason led, the founding of our rules, the balance of the power trumps the tyranny of fools. America, America, God mend thine every flaw, confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty in law.
Oh, beautiful, our open skies, how far our eyes do go. We crave a land unlimited by anyone's control. America, our liberty has blinded us with greed. Our bounty has deluded us to take more than we need.
How humbling that grace bestowed on our unworthy heads, when we, the people, turn our backs on families that fled.
America, our borders ache. Oh, let us find our soul. Unite the families torn apart, each broken heart be whole. Oh, beautiful to make amends for our abhorrent acts, our country built by labor forced on stolen lands and backs. America, repent for this, repair and say what's true. Let equity our promise be, declare these truths anew. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains' majesty above the fruited plains. America, America, God shed her grace on thee, and crown thy neighborhoods from sea to shining sea.
Words by Reverend Ashley Haran. Another world is possible, we say it again and again. Even when the proof lies somewhere beyond the horizon, beyond the reach, beyond our imagination, this is our faith. Another world is possible, not somewhere else. Another world, another lifetime, but here and now, but for all of us. Another world is possible. There is no single path towards that world. No strategy or approach that will restore balance, heal brokenness, sow wholeness, and free creation. There are many routes towards liberation, towards freedom, but the abundance of options does not absolve us from the responsibility of acting. Another world is possible. The call of duty of each moment in history is to discern. Who are we, and what can we bring with humility, integrity, and faith? What is the context, and how can we address it with agility, resilience, and skill? What is the vision, and how can we realize it? with accountability, relationship, and joy. Another world is possible. In this time of despair, of fear, of collapse, this time that is like every other era and like no other time in history, it's audacious to declare our faith and to commit our work to a world that is more free, more just, and more whole. But we are an audacious people in good company with many kin, and we are ready to show up and work hard and stay humble and make friends and hold vision, starting now, here, today, with us preserving however long it takes until that other world is not only a possibility, but another world is here.
Light of truth and the warmth of love we gather to seek, to sustain, to share.
Life is a gift for which we are grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift.
This flame affirms the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment.
Good morning. This morning, as we're taking some time for some serious reflection and to imagine our nation healthy and whole in the future, I want to tell you a true story that comes to us from John Lewis, a great leader in this nation who died just this past year. He lived a long and full life, asking of himself and asking of all of us to show up for justice, to do what we can and just a little bit more, and to make sure there was more fairness in our country. John Lewis grew up in a large family, and he would spend time with his aunts and uncles, with his siblings and cousins. There were many children in the neighborhood, and they would play together. Mr. Lewis tells about a time when he was playing outside his aunt's house with about 14 other children when a storm, a big storm, arrived. A kind of storm that made him very afraid. I'm going to tell you the story from his perspective, so it's like he's talking. So when I say I, it really means Mr. John Lewis. Aunt Seneva was the only adult around, and as the sky blackened and the wind grew stronger, she herded us all inside. Her house was not the biggest place around, and it seemed even smaller with so many children squeezed inside. Small and surprisingly quiet. All of the shouting and laughter that had been going on earlier outside had stopped. The wind was howling now, and the house was starting to shake. We were scared. Even Aunt Seneva was scared. And then it got worse. Now the house was beginning to sway. The wood plank flooring beneath us began to bend, and then a corner of the house started lifting up. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. None of us could. This storm was actually pulling the house toward the sky with us inside it. That was when Aunt Seneva told us to clasp hands. "Line up and hold hands," she said, and we did as we were told. Then she had us walk as a group toward the corner of the room that was rising. From the kitchen to the front of the house we walked, the wind screaming outside, sheets of rain beating on the tin roof. Then we walked back in the other direction as another end of the house began to lift. And so it went, back and forth, 15 children walking with the wind, holding that trembling house down with the weight of our small bodies. I can't imagine what it would be like inside that house, afraid that it might fall all apart from the force of the wind and the rain and the storm. I'm so glad that John Lewis wasn't alone, that he was there with his friends and family. I'm so glad that they figured out a way to work together. When John Lewis was much older and was writing down the story of his whole astounding life, he wrote these words. More than half a century has passed since that day, and it has struck me more than once over those many years that our society is not unlike the children in that house, rocked again and again by the winds of one storm or another, the walls around us seeming at times as if they might fly apart. It seemed that way in the 1960s at the height of the civil rights movement, when America itself felt as if it might burst at the seams. So much tension, so many storms. But the people of conscience never left the house. They never ran away. They stayed. They came together and they did the best they could, clasping hands and moving toward the corner of the house that was the weakest. And then another corner would lift and we would go there. And eventually, inevitably, the storm would settle and the house would stand still. But we knew another storm would come and we would have to do it all over again. And we did. And we still do, all of us, you and I, children holding hands, walking with the wind. So I say, as we imagine the future ahead, may we all keep walking, hands clasped, and not only hold the house down against the wind, but maybe even build a stronger house. So be it.
We offer our joys and sorrows, beginning with words from the Reverend Leslie Takahashi. Despite distance and fear, we are connected. Despite loneliness and change, we are connected. Across the experiences of our lives, we are connected. Even in the face of inevitable losses of life, we are connected. When we wish to laugh, we are connected. When we need to mourn, we are connected. Even when we dance alone in a room, we are connected. In all the seasons of our lives, we are connected. And now, in this moment, we offer the joys and sorrows that are among us. I want to thank Shar Ricky for gathering the news of the congregation. We offer our healing thoughts to Bob Beaumont, who's recovering at home from surgery, to Jim Close, who is recovering at home from another hospital stay, and to Kim Farland, who is also recovering at home after surgery. Let us offer our support to their caregivers, the people who are helping them in all the ways they can. To Maureen O'Haney, to Phyllis Close, and to Denise Durrell. We also offer our care and support to Denise Durrell as her mother recovers from surgery and as her father enters hospice care. Let us share one more moment as we hold before us the names, the milestones, the joys and the sorrows that are among us. We hold before us all the people, all the places, all the creatures, indeed, all the earth, all that is around us and part of us. Let us hold one more moment together. Amen.
From Unitarian Universalist, the Reverend Elizabeth Nagayan. Prayer for protection. For Black, Indigenous, Muslim, Latina elected officials. For the residents of Washington, D.C. For each of us who has been handcuffed or tear gassed or afraid of the police or white supremacists or our government. For each of us who's afraid every day for ourselves or our loved ones or our children or this country. May we be protected. May we be protected from generations of violence and hate, from pandemic and sickness and fear. May we be protected not because we have earned it, but because of the generous grace of justice and spirit. And may those of us who can be protectors, protect. Be pourers of tea for ourselves and others, builders of power for love for ourselves and others, reminders to breathe and eat and fight and tend, to rest and risk so that we may all be protected. And in our doubt and stress, may we rest in the air and the earth and the sky that have seen governments come and go, despots and haters come and go, that holds our bones and our breath with sacredness and survival. Words from Senator-elect Raphael Warnock. Will we play political games while real people suffer? Or will we win righteous fights together, shoulder to shoulder? Will we seek to destroy one another or heed the call towards the common good, building together what Dr. King called the beloved community? May it be survival and justice. May it be shoulder to shoulder. May it be beloved community. This is our prayer.
Oh, I may speak with bravest fire and have the gift to all inspire, and have not love, my words are vain and sounding brass and hopeless gain. Though I may give all I possess, and striving so my love profess, but not be given my love within, the prophet soon turns strangely thin. Come, Spirit, come, our hearts control, our spirits long to be made whole. Let inward love guide every deed. By this we worship and are free.
Our reading is from Toni Morrison in her acceptance speech for the Nobel Prize in Literature that she received in 1993. And she said, "The systematic looting of language can be recognized by the tendency of its users to forego its nuanced, complex, midwifery properties for menace and subjugation. Oppressive language does more than represent violence. It is violence. does more than represent the limits of knowledge, it limits knowledge. Whether it is obscuring state language or the faux language of mindless media, whether it is the proud but calcified language of the academy or the commodity-driven language of science, whether it is the malign language of law without ethics or language designed for the estrangement of minorities, hiding its racist plunder in its literary cheek, it must be rejected and altered and exposed. It is the language that drinks blood, laps vulnerabilities, tucks its fascist boots under crinolines of respectability and patriotism, as it moves relentlessly toward the bottom line and the bottomed out mind. All that language is typical of policing languages of mastery and do not permit new knowledge or encourage the mutual exchange of ideas. Here ends the reading. I begin the sermon with a message and music from the artist and Unitarian Universalist, Ysaye Barnwell. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. After the events of this past week, I find myself at the intersection of power and imagination. Imagination is the Soul Matters theme for this month, and I had been looking forward to something that had the promise of, well, some fun and some playfulness compared to the gravity of recent months. With the theme of imagination, some of the first images that were coming to my mind, well, included the Muppets and Rainbow Connection, for example. We've been watching a lot of Muppets in our house. But it's also, imagination is also beautiful music and art and rocket ships and plain old wonder and wow that shows up in nature and in jokes and in games. Silliness seems priceless right now, as does full-throated laughter. Imagination is in the sweetness of sharing something lovely in a good story. All of these things that would feed the soul. Not that the messages of this month wouldn't have had substance, but the prospect of a little bit of lightness was really attractive. And in being part of human institutions, both social and religious, I'm aware of how the universe has other plans, no matter what I do to create a schedule. The events of the past week, with the election results of Georgia, the challenge to the presidential election, and the attempted coup at the U.S. Capitol, make the exploration of imagination, well, it makes it more relevant and more immediate. As we begin in 2021, it seemed right already to begin with claiming imagination and understanding power and impact. And because of recent events, the title remains the same, and the need becomes more urgent. So here we are, at the intersection of power and imagination, and in this moment, in the specific manifestation of language. Now, to say something about imagination, it is the capacity or even the activity of forming new ideas, of concepts, of discovering images that are not currently in existence. Imagination is our ability to be resourceful and creative and find new approaches or other frames or perspectives. Imagination is thinking creatively. It is essential to solving problems, whether ones that are present with us or kind of intuited or perceived or anticipated. Now, of course, with imagination, there is a great deal of fancy as well. There is play and dreaming and exploring. Science fiction and fantasy, for example, lets us work with imaginary situations where we can try out ideas. Art and music, of course, are essential expressions of imagination as well. Even engineering, I know the engineers out there would agree, can get a bit wacky. One of the videos that came across our social media feeds in recent weeks was from Boston, was of robots dancing. So engineering, too, is a great play with imagination. We get to entertain the great question of what if? Imagination also has its problems. It's not all for glory and wonder and good. As the Black author Adrienne Marie Brown tells us, it is the imagination of white people that brown, Black, and all people of color are more dangerous. She says, imagination turns brown bombers into terrorists and white bombers into mentally ill victims. Imagination gives us borders, superiority, gives us race as an indicator of ability. Imagination can be quite fraught and used as a weapon against our very humanity. Now, power, let me just say a little bit about power. That is the ability to act, to have influence, to direct events or feelings or results, whether potential or actual. There is power within, there is power without, there is power with. It can be relational, hierarchical, intertwined, independent. And certainly, the nature of power is very personal. It is also in community. It is systemic. Far before us do we receive legacies of agency, and far beyond us do we have impact. It is all this and more. There's also the absence of power, when we feel disrespected, where there's circumstances beyond our control. What do we actually feel like we can shift and change and have agency over in our lives? And certainly the absence of power has been a significant conversation of this past year. It's really something that the contradiction we are living, that the best way to stay safe from each other is to stay home and do a lot less than what many of us had been doing in our lives before the pandemic. We are having object lessons in power this year. We have leaders who are trying to keep people safe, making use of the authority they have and the commitments they have agreed to serve, knowing that that use of advice and guidance and power would be so disruptive for school, for health, for work, for our lives. We are in more need of imagination this year. the kind that keeps us resilient and able to respond thoughtfully and creatively in every condition that we are faced with, in every moment of wondering what we can actually have influence over, and to figure out most urgently how to care for each other. That is one of the most powerful places where power and imagination intersect. How can we be good stewards of all of us? One of the specific ways that power and imagination is made tangible is indeed in language. What we say, how we say it. And what concerns me, and in this moment, how our language lives and defines our world in messages and what we have been told and what we say to others. As human beings, we listen to ourselves and to others when we are described and told who we are. For months, people in power have been telling others lies about people of color, about the nature of our democracy, and about the right to speak up against violence perpetuated by law enforcement. People have been saying that the ways that democracy has spoken up in our elections, that the ways that people of color are expressing their concerns about systemic oppression in our society, that all of those are not okay. And now it has culminated in this time and in this month. The Electoral College votes were to be accepted on schedule in a ceremony that is usually peaceful and without a lot of drama. But not this time. Members of both houses of Congress were willing to challenge what has been a clear result in our democratic process for the election of our next president. That elected officials felt they could follow through on challenging the election for their own benefit and ambition and not feel there would be any consequences for the senators and representatives who knowingly argued against the results of the presidential election and created a show of this is a terrible and sad manifestation of imagination. It is a deeply cynical move to think that there wouldn't be any consequence to such action. There is something to be said for the degree of shock on some of their faces, those who were speaking against and starting to challenge as an outward indication of what kind of dreams were interrupted, that their illusions were being disrupted. As Toni Morrison says, oppressive language is violence. Elected leaders worked to disenfranchise millions of voters all at once by the challenge to the election. And such violence is not undone, even though it had no real chance of changing the ultimate result. And then there was the current president encouraging violence and taking over the process by physical force. And that encouragement was also months in the making by rhetoric, by repetitive speeches, by communication, by oppressive language. That anyone died along with those who were injured is profoundly sad. And those lives and the losses are also the fruits of a person who has a history of speaking violently against women, against people color, against the disabled, against the poor, against the disempowered, against anyone not perceived to have power. We have been subject to such violence for years by particular individuals, but also by as a result of the long-term use of such power and the dreaming that led to say, this is how we're going to exercise control over the people. Our task in the face of such hardship and sorrow and legacy of language is to claim our imagination and our own power and our language. From John Lewis's story of how he was experiencing being buffeted by the winds, but his story was not just about him, but about all the times in which humanity has been buffeted by the winds around us. Things that would make our lives fall apart. And for me in this moment, the wind in the story is that violent, oppressive language. And I loved Lewis's aunt's solution, that she understood enough of the problem, enough of what was coming at them, to hold hands and start to find the power to save the moment, to save their very lives. And to keep trying and moving to find the places where you can sit still and stop the winds from shifting everything, no matter what that constant wind was doing. And people have been holding hands and finding those places to be together for a very long time. Little by little, year after year, people have been organizing in response to the systemic disenfranchisement of voters who are people of color or are impoverished or are otherwise less than in our systems. And we saw the results. We saw the results of this in the early voting before the November election, and we have seen it this month again, particularly from women of color who made all the difference in Georgia this month. In that intersection of imagination and power and language, it lives. This is also the reason to celebrate and cherish the vision that has been pursued for years and for decades and for indeed centuries. Because that expression of imagination and action and language of power, speaking to the people and the people speaking to each other, that kind of motivation and mobilization is so deeply feared by the people who want all the power for themselves. As Adrienne Marie Brown says, speaking as she does as a person of color, I must engage my own imagination to break free. Our task, each of us must engage imagination from our respective places in society, in our system, in our communities, in our theologies. The task of Unitarian Universalism is to engage in the liberal religious capacity for vision. Our theology claims a willingness to learn and explore, that we do better together than when we are separate. And we do this work together not to feed our pride, but in service of compassion and justice. We know it's not an either or, used for good or used for evil, that we are all mixes of all the systems and language and power and imagination that we have received, that are within us. But we can indeed use the great power we have, our agency, to understand our neighbor's perspective. Let us use our power to affirm the worth and dignity of others, and let us speak truth as best as we can to each other when we mess up in this work, and to the institutions that have created and we have created and that we need to transform. As Toni Morrison tells us, the choice is ours. May we, in this pursuit, in this great work of vision, may we choose life, choose our power, and choose our vision to make a world more whole. Amen.
Song of mother's lamentation. I hear that real though far off hymn that is the new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear that music ringing. It sounds and echoes. So how can I keep from singing? How can I keep from singing? But though the tempest drown below, I hear the truth it liveth. But the darkness round me close, songs in the night it giveth. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear that music ringing. It sounds and echoes in my soul. How can I keep from singing? How can I keep from singing? When tyrants tremble, sick with fear, and hear their death knells ringing, when friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? In prison cells and dungeon vile, our thoughts to them are winging. When friends by shame are undefiled, how can I keep from singing? How can I keep from singing? My life flows on an endless song. My life flows on in endless song of love's lamentation. I hear that real though far off hymn that is the new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear that music ringing. It sounds and echoes in my soul. How can I keep from singing? It sounds and echoes in my soul. How can I keep keep from singing.
Knowing how quickly the flame of truth may be extinguished, how easily the chalice of fellowship broken, let us be vigilant in faith, keep peace in our hearts, and make care for one another the watchword of our lives together, and so our light might go out everywhere into the world, even as we extinguish this light for now. There is so much work to do. We have only begun to imagine justice and mercy. Help us hold fast to our visions of what can be. May we see the hope in our history and find the courage and the voice to work for the constant rebirth of freedom and of justice. Let us live this dream into being. Amen. Our worship is ended. Let our service begin.